Dr. Bart and Professor Ron, are we good to go? Can I begin the session?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Good evening, one and all. My name is Unnati Kopikar, and I am the session manager for this workshop. On behalf of RRSPBL 2021 Organizing Committee, I would take this privilege in welcoming you to the most awaited event, RRSPBL 2021. I welcome all the participants and our eminent resource persons, Dr. Bart Johnson and Professor Ron Ulseth, to this occasion. I would now like to give you a brief highlight of today's workshop on what does it take to change. Change on the order of developing a new engineering program is complex and difficult process. It starts with why, analyzing the motivation of change and the change agents. The organizational change model, along with the dual layers and parts of the curriculum change model to provide a deeper understanding of the elements and actors in the process of new PBL curriculum development. The participants will have the opportunity to apply these models to the current or future change planned for their institution. I'm sure all the participants will have great takeaways from today's workshop. I would now take the honor in introducing you all to the distinguished resource person of today's workshop, Dr. Bart Johnson and Professor Ron Ulseth. Dr. Bart Johnson is currently the Provost and Senior Academic Officer for Itasca Community College and the Vice President for Northeastern Higher Education District. He is the founder of Iron Range Engineering and Iron Range Engineering Bell Program, which was ABET 2017 Innovation Award winner and identified in the recent MIT report on the top 5 emerging world engineering education leaders. He is active in engineering education research, especially in PBL and professional competency development. He earned his PhD in engineering education from Aalborg University. I welcome you, Dr. Bart. I would now introduce you all to the second resource person of today's workshop, Dr. Ron Ulseth. Dr. Ron is the director of Iron Range Engineering Bell Program and the founder of Iron Range Engineering. His other appointments include as external associate professor at the Aalborg University UNESCO Center for Problem-Based Learning in Denmark. He is a social entrepreneur who has been at the leading edge of engineering educational change. He has been in classroom teaching for more than 20 credits per year for more than 30 years. He earned his PhD in engineering education from Aalborg University. It is a pleasure to have you both of you with us, sir. I'm sure this is going to be a great session. Before we proceed to the session, I have a few instructions for our delegates. Delegates, please note that your mics are muted by default. If you have any questions for the speaker, please post them in the chat box. In the chat, do not send your questions directly to the speaker, host, or the co-host. Post the question in such that it is visible to all the delegates, and only these questions will be picked by the workshop moderator for the question and answers. Please restrict yourself from posting any greetings and introduction in the chat, as it may affect the flow of Q&A session. If the workshop coordinator conducts any poll or breakout room activities, please take an active part in it. Over to you, Bart, sir. Dr. Bart, you can take the control. I will stop sharing.
Okay.
Your screen is now visible.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to ask that question. Well, thank you. And first of all, welcome to our workshop today. We're both humbled and honored to be presenting on our experience with change and what we've found to work for us and our story. And hopefully, as you leave our workshop today, we can be a small part of your story of change. And if I could just describe both Dr. Ulseth and myself in one way, it'd be as change agents. So as you go through this workshop today, a change agent is not only someone who's making changes in their own lives, more importantly, they're making changes in the lives of others and in the systems and the worlds around them. So as we speak today, we're really speaking from the perspective of not our official titles, our duties, our roles, but really as change agents, trying to make things better for our students, for our institutions, and most importantly, for our societies. So keep the mindset of acting as a change agent as we go through our workshop today. So a lot of you have selected this because you've got an idea of change, you're considering change. And there's a quote here from 1982 that I think it's really important here, is that there's a lot of good ideas out there. But good ideas with no ideas on how to implement them are wasted ideas. And I think the waste comes from the potential to make change, to make things better, to see the opportunity for improvement. It's one thing to recognize that opportunity. The second part then is how do you implement that change? And that's where my colleague Ron and I hope to share a little bit with you some strategies to implement those change ideas. So our agenda for today, we're going to spend a little bit of time going through some change theory. This is just some of the framework that we've discovered and have utilized in our approach of our work through the years. And specifically, we're going to be speaking to the Iron Range Engineering Program. There's going to be a little bit of time for you as an individual to do some thinking, some planning, really centered around what's the change that you want to accomplish. And then we're going to share our story of change. Dr. Ulseth's going to take our story through the change theory framework. And then we're going to kind of come back to a group activity. We're going to put you in groups of 3 individuals to share and to complement on what the planned activities that you have. And at the end, we'll have some time for question and answer. We are going to look for you to have a takeaway. And this is just an example. I see Dr. Ulseth has raised his hand. Ron, did you?
I actually do have something I want to say, but go ahead and why don't you go ahead and explain that takeaway first?
Sure. This is a takeaway. This is something that Ron and I had used. The takeaway is starting for you to think about building a graphic of what do you want to accomplish with your work. And we were really, if you look at the title of this slide, we wanted to create an integrated design, technical, and professional learning model. That was the change that we were looking to make happen, was that those 3 elements of learning, think of them as legs on a stool. We did not want to emphasize just design, just technical, and just professional learning. And this was a graphic that we utilized to help illustrate our work. So the takeaway, one of the takeaways today is we want you to help build something that will be either a Word or a PowerPoint presentation that you can start sharing with colleagues. But Ron, I'll turn it back over to you first before we continue.
Sure, and thank you, Bart. I did the keynote, the session just before this. Some of you were there, I'm sure. And I received an interesting question in the chat, and then that individual followed up with me as an email during our break. And the question was this: we're proposing that for learning to be of value and for it to stick, we need to do PBL. But the person said, all of our keynotes today haven't been PBL, yet everyone is engaged in the chat and asking good questions. So is PBL really needed? Because these were lectures and people were engaged. And my response to that person is that, yes, during these lectures, people were engaged. But what about tomorrow? If we could tomorrow ask the people who were engaged in the lectures, what did you learn yesterday? And can you explain that? And can you use it? And the answer usually is no. Because during a lecture, even if it's exciting and engaging, and I love what I'm hearing, if I'm not forced to interact with that material, it's not going to be available to me later. And so that's really what PBL does, is it forces our learners to interact with the material in a way that becomes a part of who they are, as opposed to listening to an engaging lecture. And so I set that stage for us today because we're going to create something. We're going to have you doing a lot of the work. And that's the important part, because it's when you do the work today that you'll remember it tomorrow, as opposed to if we just talk about it today and entertain you today. Back to you, Bart.
Thanks, Ron. Yes, I just to echo Ron's comments, so many times I've left conferences, workshops, just inspired with ideas, but it was what I had wrote down that I could see the next day, the next week, the next month, and next year to keep challenging and framing both my work, but also work with Ron. So really keeping this, that you have a takeaway today, it's gonna be what you build is so important. So first of all, I want to just take a moment for you to think about what is the change you want to accomplish. And by that change, thinking beyond your classroom. So the level of change that we're speaking to here requires you working with others. If you want to change something within your course, working with your students, that's certainly something I assume everybody in this workshop is doing to some level already. The change we're talking about is where you have to work with your department, within your college or university, where you've got to work with others. So just let's take 60 seconds here to think about what is the type of change you're contemplating right now that you would like to accomplish. And again, looking for that level of change to be where you're working with others, working with systems to implement that change. That's the level to think about. And I'll take 60 seconds.
We have delegates responding to your question in the chat window. Should I read it out to you?
No, I think they're fine. I will read through them, and please put them, continue to put them into the chat. I will, both Ron and I will monitor them.
Okay.
And just that we're seeing some comments here, more around the project-based learning, more active learning strategies. And certainly that's something that both Ron and I find things of commonality with each of you on that. So speaking of the quote earlier about the value of an idea, but also the plan to implement that. So this is really going to take you through a system change model. This is based on the work of Freud and others right around the start of this millennium, and the work of Cotter in the early to mid 90s. And really the first thing is, if you're looking at change, again, this is working with others and within systems. The first step is really establishing a sense of urgency. Change takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time. And what you really need to do is to build establishing what that need is, but also the energy for that curricular change. Curriculum change takes time and effort to put into place. And this is where, in Ron's keynote, spoke to Simon Sinek and the power of the question of why. Why are we doing this work? And as we share our story, we'll speak to the why part. And that's what's the compelling message that elicits those that you're working with to help with this change process. The next thing is, you can't do this alone, and you can't even do it just as two individuals. You need to form a powerful guiding coalition. This is a leadership team. If you're looking to undergo change, you need multiple perspectives being brought to that process. And so really gathering a leadership team to both design, but most importantly, promote the curricular change. So if you're looking at that leadership team, it's both people that are really passionate about your idea. It's also people that maybe open to the idea, but they have some questions or resistance. They can bring the other perspective to this leadership development. And you also need people who are at different levels within your organization, not just professors, not just administrators. You need multiple levels within your organization. Not only help design the new curriculum, but most importantly almost is to promote that, because you do need people to help move this work through your institutions. We all know our own individual systems that we have our institutions, and change is very difficult to accomplish. So this leadership team is not only designing it, but they're also there to promote and push forward the change that you're looking to take place. The third real step in this process is creating a vision. If you want to get people behind your idea, and this is after your team has been formed, you really as a team want to create a vision. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Going back to that first question of the change you want, really coming back to creating a vision. And this is really speaking to what's the new learning objectives? What's the focus that you want for this curricular model? And what's the learning environment going to look like? So I think as you're building that vision, there's two important elements. What is it you're trying to have in our case, in the world of education? What do we want our students to be achieving? What are those learning objectives? And then what is the learning environment that we want to accomplish that in? And certainly PBL is a focus of this conference, and certainly a learning environment and model that both Ron and I are advocates for, but that's something you need to create as part of your vision. The next step really then is a process to communicate that vision. You need to first work with your leadership team and sound out the idea. Find out what are the faults, what are the weaknesses, what are the improvements that can be made, make those revisions, and then start to look at how are you going to communicate that out to the broader stakeholders that you work with. Planning for the change. Again, going back to the quote, you can have everything up to this point in time here in these steps for change is really about what's the change you're trying to accomplish. Building a purposeful plan, deciding what that new approach, how's that going to be used, and what's the timeline for implementation of that plan. And we'll speak to our story for that plan for change. I think one of the hardest things is the next one. If you really want there to be a success, it can't just be yourself and the initial leadership team. You need to empower others to act on the vision. If you need to use a pilot, go ahead and do that. Sometimes a pilot can be the most effective way to start moving forward that vision, to get action taking place. But it's really important to empower others to act on the vision beyond yourself, so it becomes part of that broader group, your leadership team, and those that you're interacting with within your department, within your institution. Next thing is really making sure that you're planning for and creating short-term wins. When you're going through change, there's going to be challenges, setbacks, but people are looking for successes that they can point to. So really plan to create those short-term wins, making sure that you're doing formative evaluations, working with feedback from students, from your faculty, professors in the program, really investigating what are those current strengths and weaknesses of the model, and then what are and identifying what are some indicators of short-term gains. So early on, they can see the improvements being made. And the final step, if you're really wanting this to be long-lasting change, and this is part of our story as well, is you need to institutionalize the new approaches. As a change agent yourself, as you're looking with your leadership team, you have that personal drive and energy to implement a new approach. Again, whether it's in a department, a program, within the whole college or university, but the real long-term and impact and legacy of that change is the ability to institutionalize that new approach. And that means that you need to get this to be part of how your institution, at whatever level, has implemented this change. And that requires preparing all faculty, professors, and all staff for that change. And most importantly, for ongoing follow-up with continuous improvement. So that you get to the point that the idea that you helped develop with your leadership team, you got it in place, but you start to see others taking that on, continuing that change. And it requires professional development for all of them, because it's a change in the way that they do education and really building a culture of continuous improvement where on at least an annual basis, they're looking at how do we continue to improve this. And that's not about you as an individual, as a change agent, looking at how it can be improved, where you have your broader department, your college or institution are all working for how do they continue to improve this model. So at this point, following PBL model, I've talked long enough. And what I would like you to do is to, I'll speak to one more thing, I guess. I'll apologize. So this is really the approach, the steps that are really important for there to be successful change. I do think I want to take one more moment before I have you go on your own to think about, there's so many dimensions for change, but there are probably at least 2 layers that you need to think about to go with these steps. And first of all is at the curricular level. Thinking about, as you're looking at change, there are very important dimensions to your curriculum. One dimension is the students, the teachers, the faculties, the learning goal, the content, the teaching and learning methods, and how you're going to assess that learning. So as you're thinking about change and how you're going to change the curriculum, look at things different, it's important to think of all 6 of these dimensions and not just focus on one dimension of the curriculum. The other dimensions you need to keep in mind are at the organizational level. You have an organization and it has its own culture. You need to honor and respect that culture as you look to make change and look for that to be successful. And project-based learning is very much a socially constructed learning approach. And it's very important that that structure fits within your organization and culture. Values and the conceptual change, really important that the values you have as an institution, your mission, the vision of your institution is reflected in this curricular change you're looking at. And lastly, do you have the physical space or resources for that learning model that you're looking at? Many times you do have the ability, especially at the pilot level, to make that happen. But over time, this additional commitment that's needed by your institution is to have that physical space and resources to do that. So right now, I'd like you to just take a moment to start thinking about from the individual activity level. And we're going to have you, I want you to take some time to go through 4 things here. And we're going to give a fair amount of time here. First of all, I want you to think about, describe the change you'd like to accomplish. And in the chat, it's been excellent. You've started to put out your initial ideas. And we don't need this verbally, and we don't need in the chat, but what I'd like you to do is to start to, in a Word document, start typing the change you would like to accomplish. And take, I'd say for each of these, let's take about 5, this takes some time. So we're going to dedicate about 20 minutes to this individual activity here. But let take 5 minutes to try to describe the change you would like to accomplish, and then take approximately 5 minutes to look at why go through this change. What is the positive outcome? And think of your elevator pitch. If you've got 60 seconds for the leader that you work with, that you report to, and perhaps that individual's boss or leader, if you had 60 seconds to sell them on this idea, why do it? Next 5 minutes, just start thinking about who are the stakeholders and what are their primary interests. Your supervisor, your supervisor's supervisor, your students, the industry partners you work with. Who are they? And what are their primary interests? And then lastly, start thinking about what are some of the barriers to overcome for this change. So Spend time. This is part of the takeaway process for you, so you have something later. Using Microsoft Word, I'd encourage you to do it electronically, or you could use PowerPoint, whichever be your preference. Take 5 minutes on each of these. And both Ron and I will be available here. We can monitor the chat. If there's any specific questions, we'll try to respond to those. But otherwise, we'll be silent, allowing you 20 minutes for this activity. Again, spending 5 minutes on each one. And before we go to that, I believe Ron wants to add one comment.
Yeah, Bart, could you just go back to your first slide on change? That's fine right there. So I want to be explicit that what we're doing in this exercise is helping you to create your vision. And the answers to these questions will create the vision and hopefully get us to the point where you can communicate your vision. And then a part of that is establishing this sense of urgency. So we really are using this model. And today we're really looking at step 1, step 3, and step 4, helping you identify what is your sense of urgency, how do you create your vision, and then how do you communicate your vision for the change that you desire. So that's really where we're headed with these 4 questions. Go ahead, Bart.
Yep. Thanks, Ron. And I will try to drop these slides into the chat. So if you wanted to pull them up, you can. But take 5 minutes with each one of these elements here and start building your document in Word. If you haven't already, please have moved on to the second item there if you haven't done so already. And again, the important thing, creating this document for yourself in Word or in PowerPoint as you're answering each of these four elements here. You should be transitioning now to the third one. Who are the stakeholders and what are their primary interests? And I think broadly here. Who are all the stakeholders that are involved with your curriculum, with your program, and what are their primary interests? What are their motivations? Sometimes in the US, we'll use the term social capital or social license. Why do you exist? What does your program, your department, your degree exist? And who are those stakeholders that have a vested interest in that success? And what are their primary interests? As you think about those primary interests, these are the points where you can make that connection as you're trying to cast your vision for change. That communication goes to these stakeholders as part of those steps. And it's important to really think about what are their interests as you speak to that vision, and do their interests connect to that vision for change that you're promoting? As we come into
All
the
right.
last, go ahead, Ron.
I was just going to do the same thing. We've made it through 3 of our 5-minute sessions. We're on our last session here of you thinking and creating knowledge for your problem to solve. And the next is to take 5 minutes and look at the barriers to overcome. And I can see in the chat, some of you have already progressed to this, but we've got 5 minutes left. And if you haven't already turned your attention, now turn it to barriers to overcome.
We'll give you about 60 seconds there to wrap up what you have for the barriers or in the last four. And we're going to ask you to share these with others. So give you, again, there about 60 seconds to wrap up your thoughts. We'll move to the next part of our workshop here. We probably have all learned in our classrooms that one of the more powerful tools for learning is storytelling. It's through stories that we start to understand things and also start to see how those things could connect. I mean, not exact duplication, but through stories, we start to make connections to our own lives and experiences. So to tell our story, I'm asking Ron to share our story of change, and we will kind of step through the same slides that we've gone through with you as we tell a story. But I'll let Ron start up, and then Ron, let me know when you want me to step to the next slides.
Sure. Thank you, Bart. A little bit of setting the stage, or a little bit of framing. If you look at our bios, you'll see that at least we are at least self-proclaimed social entrepreneurs. We've gone through this change process. We've started up 4 programs over 30 years. And as we look at these models for change, they weren't there for us to look at for the first 2 changes, the first 2 new programs we started. As a result, there were some incomplete, missed steps, and some of those changes really faltered. Our 3rd change, the biggest one, was the startup of the Iron Range Engineering Program between 2008 and 2015. And again, we didn't have this sort of roadmap for change. But around 2013, Bart and I were PhD students at Aalborg, and we started learning about this. And we started framing the Iron Range engineering model into these change structures. And then finally, our most recent change, the Iron Range Engineering Bell Program roadmap, we had these steps laid out in front of us. And wow, what a difference that has made. Now, we're still doing all these things, but we're doing them with more intent and with more understanding of importance. So hopefully one of your takeaways from today is that these 2 models of change, you've done a screenshot, and you've looked at what are these different steps, so that as you progress forward and think about implementing change, you don't have to fumble and bumble like we did 25 years ago and 20 years ago and 15 years ago, but you can still struggle, because change is struggle, but you can do it with more intent and more understanding of what's happening and what's to come. So with that being said, Bart, let's go back to the main slide that has the table of all the elements of change right there. Establishing a sense of urgency. So the Iron Range Engineering Program started, as I said, in the late 2000s. We were thinking about it earlier than that. And we had some urgency that we were addressing. And the first was for engineering as a whole. We saw a huge gap and alignment difference. In our country, the engineers were being educated to do one set of things. And industry was expecting the engineers who were graduating to come out and have a different set of skills. And so there was this gap, and industry was dissatisfied. Graduates were dissatisfied because they felt wholly unprepared to perform. It had a lot to do with design and professionalism, those 2 legs of the stool. The technical leg of the stool was the size of a great big solid oak tree. But the design and professional legs of the stool in the education were very small little toothpicks. And so we looked to close that gap. And as we were creating our vision and creating that sense of urgency, it really was about changing engineering education. We then went on to form a powerful guiding coalition. Some of the leaders in the world in engineering education, Annette Kolmos, David Jonasson, Jeff Freud, and I smile when I say that, because that's the person whose name is on the system change model, Freud et al. He was a part of our coalition. He was a part of our advisory committee. Sherry Shepard from Stanford University and Tom Litzinger from Penn State. We got these people behind us to give us advice, to give us guidance. As we were creating as novices, we had experienced people who could lend credence to the work we were doing. So we created the vision, and the vision was a new engineering program. It was a PBL model, and it was met with much resistance. It was met with resistance by students. It was met with resistance by parents. It was met with resistance by other professors, because they said, no, that's not what engineering is. Engineering is calculators and engineer's paper and solving problems. But industry did not have that resistance. They said, yes, that is what we need. And so we had to use the industry vision with the support from our guiding coalition to fight through. And Bart, feel free to jump in anytime you want to add to our story. So we then had to communicate our vision. And Bart, if you could go to our slide of the vision we had, and it's the one I used in the keynote this morning. This slide is literally 15 years old. We knew that we needed to develop an engineer in these 3 different ways. And we needed experiences that would allow students to develop skills across that. And that's that middle column. It's the design work. It's the PBL. It's where the project sits at the center of the curriculum. And then all of the learning happens around the project. And so this graphic, which is a PowerPoint slide, that's where we created it, is how we communicated a big part of our vision. It was, this is the new model that we want to implement in a state, in a country where this kind of engineering education just wasn't happening. Now, it was happening in our country in medical school. PBL, there were many PBL medical schools at the time, but it wasn't happening in engineering. So we needed to create a way to communicate our vision to others. And that slide from 2006 or 7 or whatever it was is still relevant today. It still explains the model this many years later. Okay, Bart, back to the change model.
Yep, just one comment before we move back to the change model, Ron. I'd say having a graphic like this is helpful. Ron and I and a few others had spent so much time talking about what we were looking to accomplish. We knew very much what that meant. However, when we talked to others, there were so many implied things that we weren't communicating, and trying to make it very explicit what we're trying to accomplish. Having graphics, being very clear with what you're trying to accomplish is very important as you try to share that vision. Don't assume that people understand what you're trying to accomplish. Make sure that as you're sharing your vision, that it is something that others can understand, and it's very explicit with what you're trying to accomplish.
So again, it's these really in this first 4, and it's really 3 out of the 4 that we're working as an outcome for today's workshop for your change, for the change that you would like to implement, helping you think about your sense of urgency, creating your vision, and how you would communicate your vision. But now I'll go look at the rest of the model and talk a little bit about how we accomplished that with Iron Range Engineering in the late 2000s, and how we're accomplishing it today with this new Bell program, which is only 3 years old. So plan for change, decide how the new approach will be used, and prepare an implementation plan. This is an interesting stage. When we started Iron Range Engineering, we had some of the people on our powerful coalition saying, you need to take 2 or 3 years just to create a plan. Well, unfortunately, our funding didn't allow us 2 or 3 years to create our plan. It allowed us to 6 months. So 6 months from when our program got approved 6 months later, we had students in the program. And at the time, we felt that we weren't prepared. We hadn't spent an enormous amount of time planning. But what we soon realized is that that plan did not need to have all of the details, because it's kind of like a battle plan, you know, in the Napoleon Wars and so on. And when there was a plan, and when you make a plan to go to battle, that plan is good for about the first 30 minutes, and then everything changes and the plan needs to adapt and evolve. And that happened as we implemented the Iron Range engineering program. There's a steep grade, steep slope of evolution that happens in the beginning of a program. So when you are planning, what you're planning is an approach. You're planning a process for that evolution, and not planning out all of the fine details of who's going to do what and when it's going to happen. Because once the program starts progressing, all of those details fall to the wayside. So you need to plan, but you're planning processes as opposed to planning details. Empower others to act on the vision. So this was a mistake that we made with Iron Range. We had a very small group within our state, but forward, and there was much resistance. We weren't empowering many of the stakeholders. We were telling them what we were doing. And there's a good paper on this, and I'm going to put a link to that paper in before we're done here today. It's called Leading Large-Scale Change. So there was an academic conference paper written about the Iron Range change process, and where we learned what did and didn't work. When we moved to the most recent change, we were much more inclusive. We spent much more time looking at all the stakeholders and trying to bridge the gaps of understanding and desire so that we had more support across all constituencies rather than trying to push through. The plan for and creating short-term wins. You have to be realistic here. You have a desire to someday build a program that has X number of students. And in my current program, the one that we're developing, our goal is to have 500 students in it. Right now we have 50, and those 50 are having a wonderful experience, but that is a short-term win. We will soon have our first graduates. And even though our funding agency is wondering, when are they ever going to get to 500? What we're showing is that the model works. We're having the successes. We set targets, and we actually created a timeline and where we should be at each point in time. And we're there now. We're at 50 students when we said we were going to be. So you create evaluations and write reports and think about what is working and what isn't, and how do we continue to evolve. And then the last step is institutionalizing the new approaches, prepare faculty and staff for implementation, and follow up with continuous improvement. That the first group of people that help you implement your program, they're really the pioneers. And one thing is you're thinking about who are going to be your pioneering staff and your pioneering students. You want to think about people who are flexible and can adapt quickly, because in the first few years of your new change, your new model, there will be rapid change, and flexibility and embracing the struggle are going to be important attributes. And really, that's what our profession is. Our profession is one of continuous improvement. I'm holding up my iPhone 11. It's much different than the original iPhone. It has continuously improved over the last 10 to 12 years. our engineering programs need to go through those same improvements. And we need to embrace that that's going to happen. Not that we're going to start PBL and it's going to be wonderful and here's what it's going to look like and it will stay that way. Instead, we are going to go through a process to implement PBL, and it will be something that is continuously improving. So Bart, as I've gone through now this first model, could you do some reflections on, as you've been with me side by side for that entire time that I was talking about, what can you add?
If I were to add something, I think it's the importance of that, building that team. And as you're looking at change and that inclusiveness of including that team and making sure you got multiple viewpoints. You don't want just people who agree with you on everything. It's having people that will challenge in that leadership team. That leadership team is so critical to have that, to be inclusive, having different parts of your organization as stakeholders there to help guide this change process, because each of us brings not only personally our own perspective, but with different roles, you have different understanding. We're talking about systems that are created by humans, and we need the right set of humans there to help make changes to those systems. So I think it's that leadership team and getting the right individuals there is probably the thing I look back and seeing as being the most important thing, because especially thinking of both Iron Range Engineering and with Bell, the people involved with leading that work, it could not have gotten done without, if one of those individuals wasn't there, the work would not have gotten done. So I think it's the importance of building that team.
Thank you, Bart. Oops, I'm going to share something in the link here real quick. So, sorry for the pause. What I'm sharing in the chat right now is the one thing is Bart and I are certainly in the second half of our careers. In my case, I'm in the last third of my career. It was relatively late in life that we got our PhDs. We got them at Aalborg University, and we centered them around the development of the Iron Range engineering program and that model. As we're talking today about sharing our story, I've just shared with you a link to our PhD dissertation. The volume 1 of that dissertation, Bart and I co-wrote and shared it, and it really is the fine details of how the Iron Range engineering model in chapters 2, 3, and 4, how that model fits into these curricular models and these change models. So how did we achieve assessment? It's described in that book. Who were our students? Who were our teachers? What are the goals? What were the physical spaces and resources? What was the culture? Much can be learned from our story, and I can tell it to you, briefly here in words, but you can see it in graphics and in text in that link that I just posted there. So if I were to take this second approach, the curricular layer, we had the organization and culture. We had a culture of continuous improvement. And then we have values, and our values align with that poster. We value the engineer as a person. We value the engineer as a technical person. And we value the engineer as an innovator. As we created change, we kept coming back to those values. Physical space is an interesting aspect of PBL. I've helped others implement PBL. The ideal space, in my eyes, is what Aalborg has, and that's these project rooms There's small rooms where a group of 4 or 5 or 7 students can collaborate. It's nice when a team can own their own room for an entire semester. But as Aalborg has grown, they've found that you need to have teams share a room. And so they share it at different times during the day. But physical space for PBL is something to really spend a lot of time thinking about. And again, we spent some time writing about it. Bart, what else would you add here?
Just something I guess I would build on a little bit is the just again, there's the values piece. I think as you're looking at this change, I think making sure you're connecting it to the values of the institution. Undergoing a whole nother change process right now, in addition to the academic programs Ron spoke to, and vision of your institution, of your department, whatever level you're affecting this change, that vision and the values are such important things. So really looking at what's the vision of your institution, your department, and what values are both explicitly stated and implicitly there, and connecting your change. Because if you've got the right values there, I think that that's a pretty important thing to focus on as you're looking to go through these change, and that how this change supports the vision and values of your institution or department.
All right, I've just posted another link, and this is to that paper that was written about undergoing large-scale change and about a retro analysis of the implementation of the Iron Range model. Well, this is a workshop, and in a workshop, the idea is that you, the participants, are creators. And we had you create through answering those 4 questions, but really now we want to bring that creation to another level. So I'll turn it over to Bart.
At this point, we're going to put you into breakout rooms. And the first go around here, just one question at a time. So would like just start with, do brief introductions, take 60 seconds to just introduce yourselves to each other. I'm assuming you won't know the people that you are in the breakout room. It's probably the first time that you've met. Take a brief 60 seconds just to introduce yourselves, where you're from, and then select one individual to describe the change that they would like to accomplish. Just the one part here in this first breakout session here. Describe the change you would like to accomplish. And then everyone else in the breakout room compliment on what they just said. What is that stood out to you of value, what you heard. Repeat that back to them. And then once you've gone through that, that individual sharing the compliment, then go to the next person, repeat that. That person shares and describes the change they would like to accomplish. And then the other people in the breakout room, each of you compliment. And all of you should be participating. There's no silent observers in the breakout rooms. This is a very active mode where each of you get a chance to share, and each of you give a chance to compliment, give feedback on the others. Just from a time management standpoint, 1 minute look at introductions, describe the change in 60 seconds, give your compliments back 60 seconds each. That's going to take about 10 minutes then for you to introduce yourselves, describe the change, get feedback from 2 people. We're going to put you in rooms of 3. So each person, there are 3 people are going to share, and the other 2 people give feedback, and they'll take us about 10 minutes, and we'll bring you back. And we will ask you in the chat at that point in time, what are some key takeaways that you took from describing that change? So when you come back, if you've got a person from your group that could just put something in the chat, what's a takeaway that your group had? We'll allow a few minutes there at the end for you to, what are some of the key takeaways? So I'll put you in the breakout rooms. We'll probably send you a few prompts in the chat session just to keep you on track timeline wise and discussion wise, but start with those introductions and then take turns describing the change, and then each person giving complimentary feedback on that change you're describing, and just that one item. And then we'll come back, we'll send you back out into the breakout rooms again to work on the why part, and we'll work through each of these. So with that, I'm going to put you into the breakout rooms. We're going to have approximately 3 in each, and going to send you there right now. I may have to, my apologies, it looks like it's the breakout rooms. May have to recreate. Yep.
Do you need any support?
Yep. I'm going to try it here just one more time, then I'll ask for you to.
Sure. Please go ahead. I think perfect.
Oops. If the participants aren't able to move there, if you don't mind making about 39 breakout rooms and moving people to them.
No, it's happening.
What's happening? Okay.
Yeah, no,
I see it now. I'm getting.
It's happening. We have about 70 people have gone to the breakout rooms. We need another 50 to accept their invitations. So we've got about 50 people still hanging out here.
Yeah, I request all the participants to just click, just say yes, give your consent to move in the another background room. You will be getting a pop-up on your screen, and you have to just accept it. So you'll be moved to breakout room.
Yep. So it looks like we're getting, most people have joined a session. A few haven't. Is there any way to, I see there's some people sitting by themselves. So I might try to move. Oops.
In some rooms, all the participants have joined.
Yep. We just have a few
Yeah.
rooms where people are by themselves and the others have not
Yeah.
joined. I guess, is there any way to move them to a room that
Their
has participants?
participants are there. Okay.
Yeah, join.
So do you want our tech team to help you with it?
Yep, if you could, that'd be great.
Yeah. Siddharth sir, can you please help us with it?
Yeah, I'm just doing actually. Those who have not
Okay,
joined, I'm just moving them slowly,
fine.
steadily.
Does
But
it mess?
again,
Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I request all the participants, please accept the request which is popped up on your screen, so that you will be moved automatically to breakout room. Just to
Yep.
take part in this activity, you need to go into breakout room.
Well, welcome back, everyone. I see there's a few raised hands, and I guess if we could turn on the chat, if there's specific questions, we will have Q&A where Ron and I'll try to answer some questions at the end. But if they're process questions, if we can enable the chat for people to ask if it's a process question. Otherwise, there's some questions about approaches and stuff. We'll try to answer those at the end.
Yes, chat is on.
Okay. So if there's a process question, put in the chat, I'll respond to it. And then Ron, if you'd take us to the next step here.
I will. Thank you, Bart. A little bit of framing before we go to the next step. And this really is framing about PBL as well. We asked you to write down for yourself an answer to these questions. And then we gave you 5 minutes to write down each answer. And then we asked you, okay, now take your answer and describe it to somebody else and get some feedback on that answer. This is active learning, and this is engagement. And it's this process of having to take something that you thought about and write it down that brings value and makes it more accessible later. And then take what you wrote down and discuss it with others. That makes it more accessible, more valuable later. And that's what PBL is about. It's about creating knowledge that we can come back to later. So it's the activities that we do. So that's why we put you in these breakout rooms, and we hoped that you were able to have conversation. Now, what we saw were a few hiccups in that some of you ended up in rooms by yourself. We tried to do the technology to fix that. But we are going to do one more breakout room. And it is on this next question, the why. What is the positive outcome? How could you describe to somebody in 60 seconds the change that the justification for the change? So what makes your change convincing? And then when we come back, we're not going to continue and do breakouts for the next two questions. We're going to stop there. But we are going to give you some individual time to create that graphic for a vision. So changing the description of your change from just being words to now being some augmented tool that you could use as you're convincing people of the urgency and the value of this change. So Bart, go ahead and what are we going to do, Bart? Are we going to have fewer rooms so we try to get 3 to 4 participants in each room?
Let's do that. If the tech team could help with there, let's perhaps just do 20 breakout rooms with the hope that we have more participants that are able to join and share the why message, and then the same thing, give that complimentary feedback. So the tech team could try to create 20 new breakout rooms and assign people. And before we do that, probably worthwhile, again, the quick 60 seconds, introduce yourselves, and then take turns giving your why statement related to the change, and then getting feedback from each person and then repeating. So if we could create 20 rooms and then move the participants to there.
Okay, so I again request all the participants, once I will create the room, there will be one pop-up message on your screen. Please accept it. So you will be moved to the breakout room that will help you to interact with your group. This is a very important activity. So please give your consent by selecting yes. Okay. Once you reject, you cannot move into the breakout room. So that is what the request. We need 20 room, right? Yeah, sure.
Yes, let's try 20 rooms.
Sure. All the participants, please check your screen. You are invited to join breakout room. Please join that breakout room.
Hello, Siddharth sir.
Yes, please.
Okay, I just wanted to check if we are there because the slides stopped sharing suddenly. That's why.
Yeah, I think speaker has stopped. So
Okay, okay, no issues.
Yeah, I did stop the sharing. We're going to add one thing to the slide deck and then I'll bring it back up.
Okay, sir. I was just trying to see if my network is right.
I appreciate that. all the breakout rooms have closed now, Ron. So if you want to continue with the next step.
Are we back, Bart?
Yeah, we're back. If you're ready.
Okay, I didn't hear you. Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome back. At the beginning of the workshop, Unadi read the description of this workshop. And, this was a 2.5-hour workshop, and you chose to come here based on that description. And the description really had like 3 parts. One is that you would be exposed to some models of change. And the next is that you would see how those models of change were applied to start up a PBL process. But the third was that you would create something of value to take with you. And that's really, really where we are now. It's we're going to use the next 20 minutes for you to create something of value to bring with you after this workshop. And that something of value is a graphic. It's a way for you to create the sense of urgency, to communicate your change. And we've got a couple here that I will show. Bart will put them up here. Of course, the one that we've been showing throughout the workshop of the Iron Range model. So that was a vision. Do you have the very first one there, Bart? Okay, so there it is. So that is a graphical representation of a model of change. And we've gone through it. Now I'll show you a couple of others, because what we don't want is for you to think that this is what we're looking for, is that it looks like this. How do you recraft that graphic for yourself? The graphic could have many, many different forms. And so we'll show you a few more. So here's a graphic about this other new program we started, and it has some way that I can describe what it is. It's designed for community college students. The people who are in the program earn money while they learn, and when they graduate, they leave with 2 years of engineering experience. And so this is an example of a graphic. How about another one, Bart? The 3 legs of the stool. So as we created the Iron Range model, and we're trying to help people understand what are you doing with this new PBL model, we used this analogy of we're creating a design person, a professional person, and a technical person. So that's another form a graphic can take. And then there's one more. And this is a block diagram of how this new Bell program that I work in works. And it's the students come in with their pre-engineering coursework. They go through a 1-semester Bell Academy where they get skills. And then they do 2 years of apprenticeship. And then they graduate. And so this is another form of graphic that we use to communicate our vision. And so now what we want you to do is to begin creating a graphic that you can use to communicate your vision for change. You might use PowerPoint to create it. You might be drawing it on a piece of paper. Maybe you've got a tablet and you can start sketching. You likely won't finish your graphic in this 20 minutes. It will likely evolve over time, but we want to give you the opportunity to begin that creation. Bart, anything to add?
No, just take this time to capture your ideas at this point in time, and really that vision, and how can you help communicate that to your potential leadership team and other stakeholders.
And as we finish this process, then we'll move into a Q&A to wrap up the workshop. So go ahead and begin.
about 10 minutes remaining on building your vision graphic, and then we'll go to the Q&A session. So about 10 minutes remaining, and then the Q&A. Five more minutes, and then we'll go to the Q&A session. We'll start Q&A in 5 minutes. Well, I think we'll transition to our Q&A time here. And there's some questions popping in here, and Ron and I will probably each grab just one question, and then from there, if the facilitators can help summarize some of the questions, and if you can ask them to us. But there are two questions that come here. Ron's going to take one first, then I'll take the second one. And then from there, if our facilitator could help summarize questions and ask them to us, and we'll do our best to respond in the 20 minutes that remain. But Ron, you want to grab that one first?
Sure. This question has popped up a few times. It says, what, in your opinion, has been the critical change over the past 10 years, which made traditional teaching ineffective and is forcing us to adopt PBL? And first of all, I don't think that something changed to make traditional teaching ineffective. I believe it was always ineffective. But I think what's changed is the light that we can shed on that. And as I mentioned in my keynote earlier, about 25 years ago, the American Psychological Association, the APA, published what they call their 14 learner-centered principles. And I just put a link to those learner-centered principles in the chat. And it just reading those makes you understand what are the essential ingredients for somebody to learn something and have it be of value to them later. I think that's the most important thing. What traditional teaching did is it allowed our students to take traditional exams and pass those exams, but it didn't create this longer lasting knowledge that they could apply. I've got one more resource for you if you really want to dive into what is the difference between effective learning and non-effective learning. And that is this a book by Ulrich Boser, and the name of the book is Learn Better. I highly recommend reading or listening to that book if you really want to understand what happens in a traditional classroom that is ineffective, and then what steps need to be taken to make the learning more effective. Go ahead, Bart.
Okay. There's another question here, or set of questions really around, in the context of India, the limited academic freedom, administrative freedom, finance freedom that you have, and that there's an approval process for any type of innovations. And certainly, I think in the U.S., there is a bit more academic freedom for faculty, but there is a lot of similarities. At the college level, our structures are very rigid. We have curriculum committees. There are challenges. My recommendation be there, but there's strengths and weaknesses with any type of approach. But if you have a much more structured model for how educational decisions are made, there's a strength to that too. If you have a more central decision-making body, if you can convince the central decision-making body of value of, in this case, of the utilization for PBL as an innovation, then you have the ability to influence much more broadly. So my recommendation would be is to first look at what you can do locally. What can you do within your department and program? Look at innovation there. And for this conference here, you have several hundred, almost 1,000 professional engineering educators interested in PBL. One recommendation I'd have to those of you that are involved with developing this conference is the idea, what's the follow-on from this conference? Is there a coalition? Is there a series of white papers? Is there a debrief? Something that can be utilized to share with the decision-making authorities towards this direction. Because I think no matter who's in a leadership role, they want to be leading into the future. And if as a group of educators, I mean, this is a lot of people who are here at this conference. If you can come out of this with a direction for how, as a country, how as a university, you can lead going into the future, that's a very powerful message. So I think trying to find something to wrap up from your conference here on PBL to the effect of the change needed can be a powerful message that helps to influence that larger, broad scale change. At the same time, looking what you can do locally in the area where you have influence. So with that, turn it over to our moderator. If you could help summarize some questions that Ron and I can do
Yes.
our best to answer.
Yes, I have one question from a delegate which says, how can we handle students who do not see the point in PBL and are contented with studying textbooks?
That's a really good question. It's one we face every day. And I think it starts with motivation, and it starts with why. One of the ways that I try and create that motivation in my students is I ask them, when you go out to work as an engineer, are they going to give you textbooks and exams? And well, no, the answer to that is no. So what are they going to ask you to do? Well, they're going to ask you to perform engineering work and complete projects. And so what we're doing is we're having your education be about performing engineering work and completing projects and acquiring those skills, rather than focusing on reading textbooks and taking exams, something you'll never do in industry.
One add-on to Ron's answer there, I would share too. If you can get engineers coming from industry who can come and validate what Ron just said, I mean, the students pay attention to you because you're the professor, but you can help get external experts to come and validate that model and that experience. And as time goes on, if you have students who go through a PBL, get out into industry, and they can come back and speak, that's even more powerful of a validation message on the PBL.
Yeah, right.
So I do see a question here. Can we contact you later? Yep, we've got our emails here. So please follow up with us afterwards. That's why we got them here. But what do you think is the next question for us to answer?
Okay, there is one question which says, on what aspects the faculty members need to focus in order to implement effective PBL?
Sure, I'll answer that first and then pass on to Ron. I think what the faculty members need to look at is that the core learning experience for the students. That's where your expertise is, at the intersection of your technical domain, whatever your engineering, mine is mechanical engineering, wherever your technical domain, that interface with that learning approaches and strategies. So I think if faculty focus there, because you do have the ability to look at what's going on in your classroom and then building from there. And Ron, if you'd like to add to that.
I'll give it a little different twist. I believe that the most important thing we do as educators is give students feedback on their development. And too often we get focused in on what information we're giving them or what grade we're giving them, and not giving them valuable information on how they can develop. So feedback on their development, I think, is a great place to focus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There is one question which reads, sir, when all stakeholders are interested in this transformation process to PBL, don't you think that legislation to this effect by the government would be of much help?
We'll tag team again. I'll give a short answer and then have Ron add to that. I think it's a yes and. If you're looking at meaningful change, as an engineer, I like to use my hands and graphically. So you need both the bottom up and top down. That's another way we could have spoke to the change. If you want systematic change, you need top down decision making supporting a direction, as well as bottom up. So I'd say yes, and you also need at the faculty, the college level, the same commitment and development. And so that's where the vision is very powerful. So going back to this conference as a vehicle for change, coming with the vision from this conference, if you can engage at that very top legislative level, so they're legislating in a direction like this, and at the same time, as a body of practitioners, as a group of change agents, if you're also building out the framework from the bottom up, what that looks like at that intersection is where the most meaningful change takes place. But it takes a vision. And I think that's an opportunity you have here at this conference. And Ron, if you'd like to add or go in a different direction.
No, I think we're good there.
Okay. Next
Would
question.
you like me to pick one more question?
Yeah, please do.
Yes. One more question reads that what level of motivation is needed for faculty members to continue practice PBL?
I'll take that. I think it requires, there's a pretty high level of motive in the outcomes of PBL, and if we're going to facilitate our students' learning using project-based learning, we have to want to do that. There has to be a why, there has to be a value. And when we can see that value, then we will do it. Well, seeing that value and doing it is motivation. So without the motivation, without seeing the value, it won't work. There's another question here that I've seen a few times now on the difference between constructivism and constructionism. Here's how I interpret those two. Constructivism to me is a philosophy that the student constructs her or his own knowledge through their activities. So that's PBL. Constructionism is really, the way I see it, is an educational method that uses constructivism. So yes, that's PBL. So my answer to that question from my interpretations would be both. PBL is both, uses a constructivism philosophy, and a constructionism is a constructionism educational methodology.
Okay. Is there another question there amongst them that we can answer?
Yes. One question reads that what are the obstacles faced when you are introducing PBL, criticism, and how to solve the slow learners or non-interested students in PBL? Obstacles faced.
Yep.
Or
I'll answer the first part, and then Ron, if you want to take the second part. I think one of the initial obstacles is, what is it? I think when we say PBL, I think having a definition, helping to create the visualization. Most individuals and decision makers their whole experience is grounded in a lecture-based educational system. So I think the first obstacle is understanding of what PBL is, but also the advantages it has as an active learning strategy over the passive traditional models, and really making that connection on the opportunity it provides. Because there is the criticism. The quickest one is you can't cover all the content needed. If I go, the quickest one that I've seen for PBL is, how can we cover the content we need to cover? And I quickly turn around with, coverage does not equal students having access to that knowledge. Just because you covered it doesn't mean the student understands it. And most importantly, they do not have practice in applying it. So there's a trade-off that you have to recognize of coverage as compared to the demonstrated ability to utilize that knowledge. And if we look at the age that we are in our society, when I entered the engineering realm, it was still much, engineers were valued for both the knowledge that they had brought with him or her, and then were able to apply. I mean, we're in the information age, so there's a premium not on what's in your head, how many handbooks do you have that you can look up information. The premium is on, and that's where the value of an engineer is, to apply knowledge. So we're at a very critical transition point of engineers being technicians or world leaders. And if we want engineers to be leaders, we have to dedicate time to demonstrating the ability to apply and utilize that knowledge. So that's where that quick criticism comes. We can't cover all the content, and the response has to be yes, but we cannot sacrifice the ability to apply and utilize knowledge for coverage. And we've got to strike a balance. And I think PBL is a very good spot to strike the balance between coverage of content And what I think is most important, and the premium that people will pay for engineers to work for them, is the ability to apply and utilize that knowledge. And I don't know, Ron, if you want to answer the second on the add to that, or the second part on the
Sure.
the slower or non-interested learner.
Yeah, well, those are two different people. The slow learner is typically the one who, in a traditional program, traditional model of learning, takes longer to pass the test, or doesn't pass the test at as high of a level. We find that in PBL, that person actually has ways to thrive, that perhaps their weakness is how quickly they can prepare for an exam, but their strength might be in how well they can create graphics and communicate and resolve conflicts happening on the team. And so oftentimes who would have the C student, that's a term we would use, the lower achieving student, they actually thrive in PBL. The non-interested student, well, if we could solve that one, we could change our profession. My wife taught kindergarten. My sister teaches 5th grade. We all have non-interested learners. And the one thing we find is that in PBL, we have fewer of them because we can try and connect the learning with the thing that is their ultimate goal. But when they're not interested and not willing to come in, I don't think we have a solution for that. I've seen a few other good questions here. I'll go ahead and answer them quickly. Can we implement PBL in the first 2 years of engineering, where it's important to acquire the natural sciences and the mathematics, or how would we do it? And let me show you how we do it. In the last 2 years, the project sits at the center of all engineering learning, and everything else feeds into it or comes from it. But in the first 2 years, the project sits alongside. So our students take their calculus course, they take their physics course, they take their chemistry course, and they're also taking a project course where they're solving a project and using some of these things, not all of them. You couldn't make a project that uses all of the principles from calculus-based physics. You couldn't do it. But do you have a project that uses some of them? Well, at the same time, you're learning all of them. So it's really, is the project on the side or is the project in the middle? And the way we do it, in the first 2 years, the project is on the side. In the last 2 years, the project is in the middle.
So I think we're going to have to probably wrap up here, it looks like.
Yes.
Probably time for one more question, and then we'll close out.
Yes, we have a time restriction. So if we can take one last question and then we close.
Do you have one you'd suggest us answering there?
Okay.
I think we've hit. We've hit them all.
Most. Maybe we'll just
Yes.
close out. I go, Ron, if you want to go first. And
Yes.
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for engaging with us for 2.5 hours. I sincerely would have preferred to have been in a room with you, in a big conference room where you were sitting at tables and your breakout rooms were face to face, and we could walk by and hear you talking to one another, and we could join in your conversations. But that wasn't possible today. It will be possible again in the future. But you stuck through this 2.5 hours, and I think we're still able to meet many, many of your goals, and I hope so. And then my last statement is, in the model, we talked about creating that coalition of experts. And Bart and I are happy to help you by us serving as your parts of your coalition of experts, if the role fits. Over to you, Bart.
okay. Well, with many of those things I repeat that Ron just said, so I'll just add this. I do think utilize this conference as a launch point for PBL in your country and at your institutions. The second thing I'd say is you've got a tremendous resource in the UNESCO PBL Center. I know for both Ron and myself, as we were navigating what is PBL, how do we implement this, I think through the University of Aalborg, you have an excellent resource that, well, we're part of that. I mean, I have to share that, but I do think, you know, you have a tremendous international resource there as you navigate this process. But I do think coming out of this conference, don't leave this conference with the idea of, wasn't that great? And then 5 years from now, you look back and we should have done something after that conference. You utilize this moment in time to make a decision, cast a vision, and do something as a larger group, not just the individuals, but as a whole group. And with that, I would just say thank you as well for being here. I appreciate you being here late in the evening. I have to admit that it started for me at 3 a.m. this morning with the time zone differences with Ron's keynote. That was a 3 a.m. kickoff, and only here because of how important we think this work is, how important the field of engineering is to not only ourselves personally, but to our societies and really the world. And we really do see the value of PBL in the change that we need to do to keep the field of engineering at the forefront of leading as world leaders. So thank you so much. Please feel free to follow with both Ron and I via email. We'd be glad to help out with, as Ron spoke to, with the leadership team and coalition type structure. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, sir. The change models and its application to PBL was very informative and interesting. The session was very interactive, with our delegates being actively engaged in the breakout rooms, which many of them have even posted in the chat window, that it was a very interactive workshop. So on the behalf of RRSPBL 2021 Organizing Committee, I would like to thank Professor Ron and Dr. Bart Johnson for having joined us, graced this occasion, and for having conducted a very interactive workshop for all of us. Thank you so much. And I also would like to thank all our participants for having interactively participated in throughout the workshop. And now that we have reached to the end of day one, and tomorrow, our next session, that is, we'll be meeting tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. for the keynote. So we will meet tomorrow. In the meanwhile, will be dropping feedback link for all the participants in the chat window. Please fill the feedback form. It is very important for us. I will be also mailing the same to all the delegates. Thank you, one and all. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you all. I'm just closing the session. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.